Hello, this is Robert Livingston, GreenLine Synergy, achieving instant results with pre-vegetated blanket. Current and traditional erosion control methods as we know them today. We've done many different things to stabilize soil, and one is sod, of course, which we both all know is very instant. Unfortunately, it does need a lot of maintenance to maintain it, and we have limited applications. So we look at our traditional methods, this is one of them, but it's also not accepted in a lot of our stormwater practices. Of course, this is fine for athletic fields and your backyard and your front yard, but not really for stormwater management because the root penetration is very limited. Secondly, we also have erosion control blankets. We have immediate soil coverage and it's cost effective. Unfortunately, without having fast establishment of plants, we can have some drawbacks also. One is getting plants to germinate in a coconut fiber blanket or even a curlex and straw blanket takes some time. And if you're on a steeper slope, sometimes this has a tenting effect. You still have erosion, and the seed bank that you have applied can be washed out underneath. And we have weeds can germinate immediately as your annual weed seed is in the surface soils. So this takes long-term maintenance and a lot of corrections sometimes to get establishment. So these are our current methods right now. So also methods that we've used is hydroseeding. With hydroseeding, it's also rolling and mulching the seed and the mulch tackifiers into a water-based system and blowing it into surface soils. And it's also very nice, and it works really well on flatter surfaces. But in hard slope areas and things like that, and usually in uneventful rain events, it can wash out and scour. So we have those losses on uneven seed distribution then and susceptible to drying out because the seed is applied wet. So it has to be maintained and kept moist to get the seed to continue to germinate and get a crop to grow. And then we have live plants, which we all use quite often. With live plants, we get immediate vegetation, but it's spaced out. And you need space for these plants because they will mature and fill in over time. You have a more advanced growth method, but the negatives on that also is because you have to put mulch down or some kind of cover between these plants, between a 12 and 18-inch centers. We can have a rain event, and on a slope situation, they can erode. By leaving the roots exposed by the following next winter, they can freeze out or we can flood out. And when they flood out, the roots are usually compacted and they can rot on us. So these are our traditional methods, and they all have their uses. But now thinking about how do we combine these things to get a much more instant effect that can handle a large storm event and cover every square inch of what we're trying to vegetate. So this is where pre-vegetated blanket as a concept turned into a reality. First, pre-vegetated blanket is using a standard nationalized erosion control product that's already on the market, reconfiguring it and putting it together in a manner that can grow in a controlled environment with everything that you want in your finished product in a controlled space that we don't have any weeds. And because it's controlled, we can propagate very rapidly, which normally takes 2 to 3 seasons outdoors. We can produce in 6 to 8 weeks and transfer it. That means the plants can continue their life cycle for that first season, go to flower and seed right away. We can secure steep slope embankments, floodplain areas, river bottoms, creek edges, etc. And we can stabilize soil immediately on a 2-inch rain event without any soil loss and no shear loss. So rapid establishment is much faster because this is not a rolled and cut crop as we know them. These plants, all the roots are intact because it's grown hydroponically. We're looking at a 12 millimeter process in thickness of our erosion control blanket with about a 5/8 to half inch a grow media on the surface. It grows in a growing shipping returnable tray. We're not rolling the crop up, so it's lightweight, easier to access difficult sites, and you can cut it in like carpet and install it. So we get much more faster results. Where pre-vegetated blanket can be used is many locations and lots of different uses. And it gives us more diversity to grow what is needed on a very specific site, which normally doesn't always happen in some respects because you're limited on the traditional methods, what will work on those sites, and it takes more time. So understanding pre-vegetated blanket is when we bring a living crop and cover existing bare soil, We've left the weed seeds and the annual weed seeds and perennial weed seeds dormant. So the living crop establishes quickly because the hairs of the roots are not cut. So the fine hairs are trying to attack in the soil because they've been able to propagate into a hydroponic media. And then after that, we can transfer it and it knits in within about a week. It's rooted. So in these diagrams and this photographs on your right shows pre-vegetated blanket being grown with a very extensive seed mixture. These crops, after 6 weeks, are about 20 inches tall, and about 7 weeks before shipment, they're already probably 24 inches tall and going to flower. Very rapid. So here's some examples of how this was used. This place location was in a end of a watershed in central Wisconsin, in the Driftless area near the Wisconsin River, near Merrimack, near the Devil's Lake State Park. This particular residential property had a very steep slope with a lot of invasive species, a lot of soil erosion, and nothing was holding the slope in place but annual weeds and invasives. So the objective was to clear the wooden staircase in the bottom left-hand corner, removing those staircases and because nothing can vegetate underneath them, putting in a stone type step for egress under our zoning and our DNR guidelines, stabilizing the shoreline frontage and the toe with a redo the whole riprap situation there, and then stabilizing the hill slope. And our conservation zoning idea was to limit retaining walls and hard surfaces, but we also had to combine several methods to give an aesthetic, but also a native vegetation. So this is how it was proposed, and this is our concept to restore it. First was to stabilize the shoreline under our DNR guidelines along the Merrimack River using a riprap base, then putting in the staircase with landings that can be following the conservation zoning according to the rules, and then stabilizing the slope. The slope was about almost 12%. So to do this, we came up with an idea on the flanks ends of the property where the water runs down through this location and drains the watershed at this particular property. We had the flanking edges is where we decided to propose and use pre-vegetated blanket. In the pictures below is just after seeding the trays in the greenhouse with a limited mix of prairie type plants could take dry, sandy type soils and a lot of sun. The basal root structure would be established very quickly in this manner, which gives us this ability to transfer the product. So above picture shows the same project under construction and post-construction, but the product is grown in the greenhouse. So on the steep slope, we had knitted in a pre-vegetated blanket on the flanking both sides of this property. We had to use a boulder cropping natural method to support soil with boulders without building a retaining wall. And in that area, we had prepped the soil, mulched it, and planted native plugs and court plants. Now, in this situation, because the homeowners are not always present, we set up a temporary irrigation system and to irrigate it to get it established. In that process, we did have some heavy rain events, and those heavy rain events did cause some sloughing and slide of the mulch, especially near the staircases and around the rocks. And then on the flanks, we had a little bit of erosion over the blanket where heavy rain events had scoured down the both edges of the property near the neighbors' properties that were not restored at all. In this situation, we can come back and we can add some extra seed and some grow mix. But really, the blanket absorbed all those rain events without any shear or loss. The native plants you see in this picture in the bottom foreground photograph shows what natives are starting to establish throughout the spring and early summer of that year. But look at the blanket on the right. It's this fully 100% established every square inch. That gives us stability. And that's very key to projects like this. That way, we can also show you the difference between what a pre-vegetated blanket install looks like, and you have 100% coverage compared to doing normal traditional methods. And if you look at the top picture, we had some mulch that had to be adjusted, and there was some scour loss behind the silt fence. At the foreground, also, we had native aquatics put into the riverbank to stabilize the toe of the riprap. But we do get blooms the first year. Because the plants are not bent or crushed when they're grown in the facility and then through the shipping and delivery process, the plants can continue their life cycle that first year and go to almost maturity where we get seed and flower right away. So we have a mixture of forbs and grasses. The next project is a municipality in Walworth County in southeastern Wisconsin near Lake Geneva. This drainage basin, this ditch, handles about 14,000 acres of runoff, and it goes directly to the lake through some residential homes on the lake. We had major bank scour, a lot of sediment loss, and bank cut that then sent out huge plumes of sediment and cloudiness into the lake itself. The idea was to secure this drainage easement owned by the city of Fontana, but also as an egress walking path to Lake Geneva for the public, but is flanked on two uh, premium residential lakefront properties. So how do we establish a riverbank creek bed that can spike in a high flood event and not compromise the neighbor's property? So what first thing was to do is take the rock, a lot of the rock that was stacked here before by other landscapers had to be removed and then reorganized in a more of a shallow bank method so it's not channelizing the flow. So it drifts up and spreads when it needs to without damaging and scour, and then reestablishing native plants and reconfiguring. So our base flow in this creek is probably about 3 to 4 inches by 9 inches wide to 12 inches wide, but it can spike as high as 3 feet deep and about 20 feet wide on a 1 inch rain event. And we had multiple 1 inch and 2 inch rain events through this process and continuing today. So in this process, we grow a blanket that can handle a wet mesic at the bank toe of each side of the ditch, and then a prairie and blend it into an ornamental system on the flanks. So during the construction, we were growing this product. See the above slide. We're growing about a 17 to 18 species mix in two crops, an A and B crop, one for wet mesic along the channel bank edge at the base of the toe, and then the prairie along its flanks. So the big thing is designing is thinking about aesthetics as well as in this particular place we have need aesthetics for because we have two residential homes, but also it's a public space. Secondly, is also has a function. The crick bottom was just put in with riprap with no fabric, so it can slow down and give more of a riffle left for water. And then from that, we can add and complement the existing container plants that are on each side of the properties. In this picture here is 1 week of post installation. So you see a piece of asphalt on your left-hand side that is a easement to a pump station for sewage that's also on this easement, and it's flanked by this walking path and easement down to the lake. So 1 week post installation, we're already at about 18 to 20 inches and about 17 species. 90-day post installation, and now we're towards the, uh, right now that picture is probably about September, and we got a lot of plants already blooming and doing what it's supposed to do. We had some multiple large rain events through this process already. It could lay this crop down and it stood right back up in a couple days. The next picture here I just shows you what a spring follow-up and following installation looks like. This is probably back in mid-April or so. So the creek is running its normal flow. It's stabilized. We don't have any soil loss, and we've protected the soil going to the lake from being washed. Um, Back here is this picture. Here is a 1 year post installation. So now we have our species are really matured and gone to seed, 2 year and 3 year. In these processes, what's neat about it, you can come back in about 2 years and do a controlled burn if you like, or a cut and bag method if you want to get some of the duff off. There's very little or annual weeds to deal with, and we had very little or no loss in the situation, but we were able to blend a natural aesthetic with an ornamental residential aesthetic and make it function in a very high erodible location and make habitat at the same time. So in this process, in originally when we designed this one, we had used an annual cover crop. And I wish we had never done that. We don't do that today because annual cover crops tend to sometimes show back up and can creep out and force some of your forbs and natives that you've designed in not to show up as aggressively. So we chose now to just use no cover crops whatsoever and use pure seed, whatever is designed and what your final project you want it to look like. That's how we propagate. So in that process, we can go to a system that gives you exactly what you want, and we can figure out what is site specific and works best for all situations and locations. On this particular project, we had a 5 year maintenance plan. We did remove the switchgrass in the ride. It was in the cover crop, and then we don't use cover crops like I said anymore. And we do several prescribed burns. We've done two so far in this location in March. Working with the municipality and the local homeowners, we were able to come in early and cut and knock everything down, and then do a real quick controlled back burn on this, and wet down the ornamental areas so the evergreens, hemlock, and arborvitaes would not be singed, and we can burn it off and get our forbs to flower more aggressively and rejuvenate this. And at the picture on the left is what we see today. So using pre-vegetated blanket and its methods, we can come up with lots of different solutions for difficult sites. It's just another tool in the arsenal that can be utilized that's not being um, successful in our traditional methods. We can replace that quickly and efficiently and have sign off and have vegetation growing every square inch of your location between 70 to almost 100% within 6 to 8 weeks from time of growing to time of delivery and installation. Um, this product and all its ways you can mix up your different types of plants that you want gives us a lot of flexibility in making building the biodiversity, and we're not limited in any manner. It's not a rolled cut crop, so it's lightweight to transfer. The trays can come back to the growing facility, returnable deposit, and we can grow another crop immediately. So that's kind of a snapshot. Pre-vegetated blanket from GreenLine Synergy. Thank you very much and appreciate your time.